Hey, Composite Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about the use of effects in a track. And so there are two stages. There's the creative stage, and then there is the mixing stage of effects. The creative stage of effects is the stage where you are using effects to establish the timbre of a single tone. So, for example, let's say that I'm going to make a super sexy pad sound. And so I might start with some saw waves, then add in an analog filter, take off some of the high ends, maybe have the filter move, add some reverb, add some chorus, or maybe unison. I might even distort it a little bit and add some noise. All these things affect my sound and are considered effects. The main important note of the creative stage of effects is that these effects are effects that are determined by there's no rules. That's the main point. They're determined by just your instincts. You have some goal, you have some vision. Sometimes it's very specific. I want to make this sound. Other times it's a lot less specific. I want an aggressive sound. And so that's what drives your decisions in the creative department. You may you may add an effect that adds a lot of gain, and then you may compress it and then EQ it weird and then distort that and then do something to that. Now, a lot of times these are like mostly dubstep sound design ideas. For creative sounds on a more common level, picture a guitar. You're going to run it through maybe an amp simulator, maybe some distortion effects. Your effect processing is quite aggressive, maybe not as aggressive as a sound design for like our sexy pad. Like the more effects we add, hopefully the sexier we're getting, right? Because that's the ideal we're chasing. But for like the guitar, whatever effects we run it through in our final sound, as the guitar sound that we like, that's going to be all creative processing. Now, the next step is there's sort of a fine balance between these two. The next stage is the mixing effects stage, where you look at the composition as a whole and you say, how will these effects interact together? How can I augment the effects or maybe even process things together? Like maybe I want all my woodwinds to be processed by the same reverb so they all sound like they're in the same space. And that we could get into all sorts of somewhat detailed discussions that I don't think are all that worth it sometimes, as far as like what that could mean for your composition. But the main point is there are these two stages. And now there's one rule that I sort of look at and I'm careful about. Not necessarily what to do, just what to be aware of. And the rule I usually pay the most attention to is what I am doing affecting the character of the sound, or is it affecting the level? If it's affecting the character, then I'm cool. Do I like it or do I not like it? And then I make my adjustment. If the level increases, then I want to be careful about that. If I'm doing something specifically to affect the level, such as I know I want to filter it this way and I know it's going to affect the level of my sound quite dramatically, that's cool. But if I'm doing a mixing effect, that is a red flag. So whenever you have an effect that increases the volume of a particular element in your mix, turn it down so that you can compare the sonic quality of the effects being on and the effect being off. You want to know what the effect does. You don't want to know what the volume change sounds like. A lot of new people will start their processing, and because they have increased the level of their track through an effect, they think therefore that effect sounds really good. And so you just want to be really careful with that. And I'm not going to get into a detailed discussion of like what that can mean right now. That's what I have the mixing series for. But let's go ahead and jump into seeing how this is applied. So one other thing I want to say before we do that is physics effects. So for example, you might say a piano has no effects. You just record a piano. But I want to point out that, of course, the piano sound is created by an oscillating string inside the piano and the soundboard that's attached to the piano. And then it's the way you hit the string with the hammer. There's all these other things that go on that naturally filter the sound. These are all affecting your sound. And you have control, if you want to get really crazy, over all these things by just interchanging parts on your piano. So that sort of processing we generally don't consider, but it is there. It's the construction of the instrument. With a guitar, you choose your amp and stuff, so it's a little more choosable. It's more common to augment these things according to your own desire. But with things like flute or clarinet or piano, we often don't consider the different materials these instruments are made out of and things of that nature. But that should be considered as well as creative processing. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you. And what it is a simple beat. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I want you to pay attention to the use of effects. Now, I guess I have a number two rule. A number two rule is if the effect is distracting you, like if someone is listen to your track and they comment about the effect, and they don't comment about your artistic vision. If they're not picking up your artistic vision because they're distracted by this effect, then you've ruined your track with effects. And so you should always use an effect to embellish an artistic vision. So don't go too crazy on them sometimes. Sometimes it's not necessary. So here I have this track. There's lots of effects in here. And just take a listen, take a note to them. So just keep an eye out for them. I'm going to skip to like the major parts. So here it is. And right here. And then over here. So obviously I like this part. I let it play the longest. There was a string cut out here. So don't mistake that that was not an effect. That was a processing error. So we paid attention to the effects. Now my question to you is, which more effects are there? Are there more creative effects or are there more mixing effects? And I'm willing to bet that most of you will say mixing effects, which I would agree with that. So I'd say, oh, okay, yeah, there are definitely more mixing effects. And the mixing effects would be like the verb on all the different sounds, and the equalization. Like the drums have equalization on them. And I'm not going to talk about equalization because I've gotten distracted when I was recording this video earlier by explaining a whole bunch of philosophy behind equalizing. And I was like, I'm not even going to try and do that right now. So those would be considered creative effects, and that just helps my track glue together. Puts the drums in their spot, makes all the sounds sound better together. While the sounds themselves, I chose mostly sampled instruments, which means I chose instruments that have physical effects that I enjoy. That's all that means. So you could argue that there will always be more creative effects because the sound has to be generated and changed to sound like that sound. But of course, when I ask this question, you and I both understand that we're talking about effects that you put in the chain. Like we're thinking compressors, equalizers, filters, not necessarily the physics. I just want you to be aware of that because a lot of people, they skip out on this extra option they have. So here, the piano, I'm not really doing anything. Of course, it's being physically generated, but I'm not really touching the piano. Whereas the harp and the bass, now the bass, I do have some creative effects. I mean, you have to amplify the thing like a whole bunch of times in order to get a tone out of it. And then you have to run it through things. So there is some creative stuff that creates the tone of the bass. Now, the important thing, the way that you know it's fine, is that the bass is not distracting. It does not pull itself out of the track in a way that's unnatural or appalling. You say, people listen to this and go, oh, this is just a chill track. It's just a chill beat. And they just listen and you just jive with it. That's all. There's nothing like too crazy. In higher tracks, you may get more abrasive sounds like dubstep. You'll have these very crazy sounds with sound where the effects are clearly popping out, but they pop out in a very specific way that meets your artistic vision. So this is just some stuff that I wish people had told me on the use of effects. Now, let's say I'm doing a track and so I'm going to make a sound, right? And let's say that I just open up a VST and let's say, okay, I want a cool background pad sound. And so what I'm going to use the filter right off the bat. I'm going to turn my volume down because it'll be way too loud. And so let's say, okay, I like that. My next effect will be unison. And so maybe bring down the pitch variation and filter it a little bit more. Maybe high pass it too. Oh, my sound. Oh, it does. A high pass. And maybe it's still a little bright. So maybe I could fix that with some equalization. And then I could chorus it. And so you see, you go along and then the verb probably sell it. And then we can move the filter. And at no point did I have some tremendous level increase. That's generally what I'm watching out for. But this did have a dramatic volume reduction. And that's sort of a good thing for mixing philosophy. I'm not going to jump into it because there's different workflows that can cause you to achieve different mixes. They naturally link themselves to certain ideas. It's not that they always happen. You can, if you deliberately go, if you know about these ideas, you don't have to be attached to those ideas. But typically, that's why new people, when they turn out mixes, they all tend to have similar problems, is they're attached to habits and workflow. If you want to change your mixes, change your workflow. There's actually a really good article recently I read on that. It was like, whoa, yeah, this guy nailed it. But anyways, you see, okay, that's pretty cool. I could see the sound fitting in here, maybe as a background thing, doubling with like a bass or something. I don't really have room for a pad. It's not really in the idea of the track. So that was just an example, though, of being creative and pulling it out. And I just made decisions that felt right. Maybe I want to, highly compress it. If you ever watch any of my sound design or sounds like videos, you'll see some more aggressive processing taking place. And I'm just chasing what I think will get me the results. But when I mix, and I take a completely different stance on how I'm going to put things together, and it can get kind of complicated because of the workflow. But that's my stance. I hope this was helpful and useful. But you notice here that this is just an example of like, yeah, a lot of effects are used. For example, there's equalization on the drums, but there's nothing that like is agony to your ears or your brain as like, wow, this really doesn't belong there. If you have any questions, let me know, subscribe, and have a blessed day.
It is still my conviction, as I wrote in 1947, the compelling necessities of the moment leave us no alternative to the maintenance of real and respectable strength.